Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Edge Magazine. Welcome to our YouTube channel, and welcome to this fantastic conversation we are going to have with one of New Jersey and New York's finest. I'm going to read this because this is a lot. She is an Emmy Award winning correspondent for NBC for New York since April 2013. She's covered breaking news, general assignment stories in New Jersey, and serves as a fill in anchor on all of NBC4 New York's newscasts. Her first book, More After the Break, a reporter returns to 10 unforgettable news stories, revisits the most memorable stories that she's covered during her 2-year career through the eyewitness perspectives and her own. She is Jen Maxfield. She's here. Hi, Jen.
Thank you so much for having me. By the way, it's my 22-year career.
Holy
Uh,
moly.
10,000 interviews would be a lot to do in just 2 years. So,
Did I say two? Oh my, yeah, that makes a lot more. See, again, having a pro on board, this is very beneficial already. We are paying dividends here, but thank you so much for joining us. The book, such rave review, like everybody loves not just the execution of the book, but even just the concept of the book feels like such a really unique direction for somebody, moving from the fast paced world of what's the next story, and you taking the time and the energy and using that passion to go back and kind of drill in deeper and find out, what happened since that time that you reported it. What led to that idea? Was that something that you had brewing for a long time?
it was something that I would frequently think about, especially when we had a story that was so impactful or emotional that I continued to think about it for many days, weeks, months, years, even after I reported it, long after I'd moved on to another story. What
Mm.
was interesting was when I would hear that feedback from viewers. Whatever happened to this person? Or why don't you ever follow up on that story? And
Yeah.
then 7 years ago, I started teaching at Columbia Journalism School, and I started hearing that from my students asking, why doesn't local news follow up more on stories? We're so curious about what wound up happening. And so it was really the combination of both my own natural curiosity and also the feedback I was getting from our viewers and from my students that gave me the inspiration to go out and try to find these families who I'd met on assignment so many years ago.
Yeah. What was that process like? I mean, to sit down and write a novel or write a straightforward book with your own knowledge is one thing, but there is such an element of going back and doing more investigative reporting, and even just I'd have to imagine whittling down like which stories you were going to focus on. What was that process like, and how long did it take?
It was hard to do, and certainly there are more than 10 stories that I'm still thinking about, but the ones that wound up in the book, I did a couple things. The first thing I did was I just sort of free association wrote down all of the people who were still on my mind,
Mm.
the stories that really stood out to me throughout my 2+ decade career. And then, of course, it was a matter of trying to find people. In some cases, I may have still kept up with them on social media, but in many cases, social media didn't even exist when I
Mm.
met these people. And frankly, in some cases, I wasn't even sure if the people were still alive. And so I went about trying to find people in a variety of ways, everything from sending Facebook messages to writing letters and actually mailing them. The most I went to people's apartment complexes and places of work and tried to find them there. The most unusual way I found someone who did wind up actually saying yes to the project and participating in it was there was a family I'd interviewed in Staten Island during Hurricane Sandy, and I really wanted to catch up with them again. And I had sent several Facebook messages and nothing had been returned. And I Googled them, and it turned out they were having a baby and they had a baby registry online. So I did wind up sending a small gift from the baby registry with a card. I figured that's something I know that they will read. And I said, congrats on the baby. And by the way, remember me? I interviewed you during Hurricane Sandy, and they did wind up participating in the book, and they're part of chapter 2. So, and by the way, not everyone I contacted either agreed to do it or ever got back to me. So there's still people who I'm wondering
Mm.
just not interested, or did I have the wrong address? Who knows? But it definitely was an investigative effort to get the people, just to get in touch with people after all of these years.
What an adventure unto itself, just to get to that point of lining up those stories. we talked about the feedback for the book, and then, obviously teach, all the different ways that you've, gone around and talked about the book, and, just all the feedback that you've gotten. Are there certain stories of those that you selected that feel like they're resonating, um, particularly powerfully with those who've read the book so far?
I'd like to think that all 10 of the stories resonate with people. The other feedback I've gotten has been that different people sort of connect with different chapters. So
Yeah.
maybe it's because you're familiar with the town where it happened, or maybe you remember watching it on the news. I mean, I hear a lot about chapter one, which is about the Staten Island ferry crash, which happened in 2003, which many people may remember. It was a national news story. It was horrible. It
Mm.
happened 2 years after 9/11. So the city was still really healing from that. And then we have this other terrible commuter disaster. And the chapter is about a young man named Paul Esposito who lost both legs in that crash and who certainly would have died were it not for the efforts of a nurse who was visiting from the UK. She was on the Staten Island ferry as a tourist,
Wow.
and she wound up saving his life. And just hearing about the paths that both of their lives have taken, both the hero, nurse, and the person whose life was saved, um, what has happened to them in sort of unexpected ways, really, over the last 20 years has been very interesting for people to read about. And I also think it's fascinating to consider that whatever narrative seems to be the story the day that we're covering the breaking news, things really change over the years, and there are a lot of details that when we don't go back to follow up on stories that we miss and that the public misses as well.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I have to ask, because you've talked about how you've been thinking about this for so long. You're busy enough without thinking about the past, just everything that you do day to day. I think a lot of people really would like to know, what is a typical, like, just lay out what a typical workday is for you from start to finish. How much of your life and time in that day is encapsulated in everything that you put out into the world every day?
Sure. So, yes. And by the way, in addition to being a reporter and fill in anchor for NBC, I'm also a mom of three kids. I have two kids in high school and one child in middle school. So, they all keep me on my toes as well.
Mm,
But yes, so um, the way that it works in local news typically is, and the way it works for me at least, is that in the morning, I put together a list of stories that I pitch to our newsroom, and we have a morning meeting, and it's decided, okay, the photographer and I are going to go out on this assignment, which might be a story that I pitched, or it might be some sort of breaking news, or perhaps a news conference or court case, something that was on the calendar.
yeah.
And the photographer and I go to that scene or go to that community, and I do some research on the way out there. We interview people once we're there in person. This is not a work from home job.
Right.
And the photographer and I will go back into the news van, and I will view the video and take notes on the interviews, and I will write the script. We do write our own stories, by the way. That's a big misconception. But
Mm,
I write my own script, and then the photographer will then take my script and edit the story. And then we go live together at 4 or 5 or 6 p.m., sometimes two of those times. And that's it. Everything I just mentioned takes place in an 8 hour at most time period. And there could
mm,
be days when the story we're sent out to do at 9:30 in the morning could change one or even two times before the broadcast that evening.
yeah, yeah. Um, I mean, it sounds nice and neat, and, encapsulated into an 8-hour workday. But mentally speaking, I mean, we know that you're constantly thinking about past stories, constantly thinking about, everything else that goes into your job. Like, what what does it take for you? What is the occasion that allows you to, like, shut that side of your life and your world off mentally? Is that something that you make a habit of on a daily or a weekly or at any point? Or is it just sort of a 24/7 kind of news cycle going through your brain, even as you are in other parts of your life?
So I do try to turn off work to some extent so that I can be present for my family.
Yeah.
When, for example, when I come boarding and maybe I want to have dinner with everybody or help my kids with their homework, whatever the case may be, I will
Yeah.
plug in my work phone and leave it there. I'm not obsessively checking on Twitter. I've made an effort over the years to stay in touch with people who I've met on assignment, and that's my choice. And I would also say that the training that I've received doing this frenetic schedule every day
Mm,
where we have to get a story on the air and where there's really no way to prepare for it. I'm working tomorrow at NBC and whatever I'm covering probably hasn't even happened yet. So there's
right.
not really any way to prepare. But on the other hand, I think I was able to accomplish writing this book in a fairly short time frame because of my training writing scripts in a moving van over the last 2 decades. And I think that perhaps sometimes I'm able to be more calm, even as a parent, because I've encountered so much chaos out in the world. I feel very thankful for
Yeah.
the health and safety of my own family. So I really try to not sweat the small stuff and really enjoy my time when I am with my husband and kids. So I think that it all sort of feeds on each other, but it definitely is a very unusual profession, being working out in the field as a news photographer or a news reporter. And
Yeah.
I've found that, in writing the book and putting it out there and sort of dispelling some of the misconceptions, like that we don't write our own stories or that I have some hair and makeup team traveling around with me or that somebody just hands me a script. I think putting some of those misconceptions aside has been good for the industry generally. And I've heard from a lot of colleagues that they appreciated sort of the real story being put out there
That's
instead
great.
of what people are accustomed to seeing on a sitcom on television.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Um, You mentioned that you're also a professor, Columbia University, Graduate School of Journalism. I'm just curious, from a very general perspective, what do you think for those going into the journalism field in 2023 versus when you started and you were first entering this world? What are the changes as far as not necessarily the technical qualifications, but just I guess sort of the broad attributes that you need in order to survive and thrive in journalism now versus then.
In many ways, the young people who I'm teaching and mentoring now are much better prepared, certainly to go into broadcast journalism because they've essentially grown up on camera. I mean, I
Mm,
didn't have a video camera growing up. I didn't, even when I was in journalism school, we had to check out a camera from the school in order to go shoot video. So the idea of even talking on camera was sort of unfamiliar to me starting in this business. Whereas young people now, they've been doing FaceTime calls or posting on YouTube, and certainly having a camera on their phone that they walk around with at all times is a huge advantage to them as far as actually communicating with people through a screen. And unfortunately, for a lot of these kids, they've spent far too much time on Zoom. So they're also very familiar with that. Um, and I also think that what's different about what these students and young people are doing now when they come into the journalism business is they also have the added ingredient of citizen journalism. The fact that everyone has these cameras on their phone can give you, in some cases, more of a 360 look at what's actually happening. So when I go out to cover a breaking news story now, I'm not just asking people to do an interview about what they saw or heard or what they know about what took place.
right.
I also want to know, do they have doorbell camera footage?
Hmm.
Well, that all can really make a big difference as far as putting together, in some ways, a more holistic and authentic story. Though I think that a lot of young journalists today also know that there's the question of accuracy. When everyone has the ability to take video and sort of manipulate it in any way that they may choose, we have to be more careful about running citizen sourced video just to make sure that we still are upholding the standards of accuracy.
All right. Well, Jen Maxfield's book is out. It is available. It is More After the Break. A reporter returns to 10 unforgettable news stories. And of course, we can check you out on NBC4 New York, a constant presence and a constant pleasure to see you and to absorb everything that you're reporting on a regular basis. Last question before we leave you. Any more books in your future?
Nothing at the moment. I have some other ideas, but I have not started writing anything else yet. It was a very heavy lift to write this book, as I'm sure anyone can attest to who's ever written a book. I did write it during COVID, when actually my work schedule, if anything, was busier than usual. But what slowed down for me, at least, was my children's activity schedules. So dance competitions and soccer tournaments and all the things that I'm doing now on the weekends again. Unfortunately for my kids, I wasn't for a period of time, and that was really where I captured the time to write the book.
Yeah.
So maybe when my kids go to college, I'll write another book.
There you go. There you go. We'll let you get back to it. We can't wait to see you on our TV screens very, very soon. Thank you so much for joining us, Jen.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me and for caring and your interest. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks. Thank you guys for joining us. We'll see you next time. Thank you.